Hi everyone, and welcome to the first webinar in our Life of a Color series. Today we're going to be talking about inspiration and ideation. Presenting today is Thomas Meeker, a 3D solution architect at X-Rite. I'm Robert Grotan, the Global Technical Marketing Manager, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Just a few quick things to go over before we get started. If at any time you have any questions during this webinar, please feel free to submit them in the space provided, and we will follow up with you after the webinar. This webinar will also be recorded, and you will receive a link tomorrow so that you can review the webinar again at your convenience. So with that, I will turn it over to Thomas to get things started.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robert. And hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Again, my name's Thomas Meeker. I'm the 3D solution architect for X-Rite, working primarily with our appearance portfolio. And today is part one, and this will be the inspiration and ideation section. So let's jump in and talk more about that. So we've broken this down into 4 sections and 4 webinars to fit that. So the first one, inspiration and ideation, is going to be about developing the color concept. So taking this idea, whether it's a product or packaging for a product or whatever that may be, and start to think about how we are going to develop our color palettes and how we may be able to use tools offered by X-Rite and others to start to do some pre-visualization, come up with maybe some digital prototypes instead of physical prototypes before we even get into the next step. So today we'll be talking about that, and then in section 2 I'll be talking about color specification. So let's get started. So for this webinar series, what we have decided to use as our case study or inspiration is a child's ring tower toy. So you'll probably recognize this fairly iconic toy. And the direction we're going to take with this from a inspiration stance will be we're going to do a seasonal inspired version of this iconic toy. So working with this, let's say the geometry, it's going to look the same. What we're going to change though is the color palette, and talk about that through all 4 of these parts of this process, but utilizing this as our case study. So one of the places I love spending the most time in the fall is northern Michigan. So this is a photo actually taken from Mackinac Island, looking out over the water, the Straits of Mackinac. And I decided to use this because, of course, this is a very colorful palette to pull from. And the colors that I pulled from this, and some of the blues came from another photograph too, but are these. So here is now our palette that we'll be using to do the recoloring or rebranding of this iconic toy. So one of the first steps is let's take ownership of this palette. Let's give it not only its Pantone number and stuff like that, but let's give them names, because let's make this a unique version to us. It also helps in communication. So instead of saying, oh, you know, the really maroon looking one, not the more red looking one, you know, that's just going to hold us back from being able to communicate with the rest of our team. So by giving them names, we can really communicate a lot faster. I can quickly say, you know, we really need to change Andros because it's going to be hard to match that in formulation. Now we're talking a common language, makes it a lot easier. We also want the Pantone numbers for that, because that is a system in which we can communicate, and there is a reference point for those. So we have the Pantone guides and stuff like that that people can use, or our website, or Pantone Connect if you haven't checked that out yet. So now we have a name to help communicate, but then also a Pantone number that's attached to it. And the Pantone number does help later in the game too with the specification, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Oh, and then I almost forgot. The color that I will be talking about, and really Tim Mao in his parts of this webinar series, will be the color Epiphany. And you'll understand more about this once Tim talks about formulation and quality control. But we did decide to choose this one color for this presentation. So how are we going to get these materials ready for doing, say, visualization and also to help later in the specification? So we have here on the right-hand side is our TAC7 device. The TAC7 is a scanner measurement device for full appearance of materials. So you could actually measure anything from car paints to textiles, leathers, whatever you want to do. And what I did is I used this device to get a much more advanced and realistic version of a Pantone plastic. And then what I did is I used one of our other devices, the MAT12, to scan the different Pantone swatches so that I could start to do some variance and specification and development of these colors. So how now do I take all that information from these devices and then start to put that into files that are usable? I'm using a software called Pantone Connect 2020.1. So this is our new version, actually coming out this week, end of November, beginning of December. And we're really excited to be announcing this release. This software, Pantone, has been used to control the TAC7 device as well as our virtual light booth, and creates what's called an AXF file. So the Pantone software is what has driven our appearance products, or what we call our total appearance capture ecosystem for the last 5 years. Now, what is changing is that now we can also use other inputs to now inform our these complex materials that we're scanning with the TAC7. So you could use color libraries from Pantone guides, like I showed before. You could already have a library of CXF files that you're using, or you could use one of our other handheld devices. And this is really what's going to enable our customers and people that are working in this arena will be able to really be able to do things a lot faster now. So we're also able to recolor AXFs, search and browse, and then in the future we're going to be adding more quality control information to the AXF, and then also the ability to compare colors, so another type of quality control. And lastly, what's the important aspect here is the idea of digital prototyping. So instead of doing physical prototyping, we're really going to hopefully be able to make quicker decisions by using digital prototyping. Maybe in this design phase, could be more in the formulation phase, who knows, but having this as a tool can really help us to communicate with our team and those that are the decision makers to come to decisions much quicker. So to give you an example of how I'm using this software, and I talked about this before. So what I did is I took, this was a SVBRDF scan from our TAC7 device, and it's, I can't remember what the number is, but the name is X-Rite. It's one of our Pantone cottons in our cotton library. And what I did is I used that, oh, there's the number, and we used that as our source material. Then what I did is I measured our solid coated chips, which are the closest to our plastic chips. So we want to, get to a plastic, and so what we're doing is using those Pantone coated chips. And then the idea being that we could then do, like for this instance, using the cotton, create a palette of cottons. Or for this toy, what we're doing is actually creating a series of these colors as a textured plastic and a series of these colors as a smooth plastic. So those are the ones that I ran prior to this presentation. And then what we could do if we wanted to do a textile version of this, we could actually test that out as well. So let's take a look at the next one. So this is what we call, this is a new feature inside of Pantora called the variant editor, which allows you to do these variants of materials. And as you'll see here, this is our Epiphany material with a Pantone cotton. And this was done not by measuring every single cotton out of the book, but actually by doing the color replacement to get accurate results using spectral data. I think I talked about that a little bit, but when you see the prism down here, that means it's spectral data that was used from measurements from our other devices. So now we can start to visualize this, and this is just on our default blob inside the software. But obviously the goal is we want to see how this looks on the product. So what you're seeing here is on the top, 3 different variations. One where we're going blue to red. This one's red to blue. Change the base of this one just to sort of change things up. But you could do, you could do endless numbers of variations if you wanted to. So just showing the ability to quickly visualize, and all this is done in our Pantora software, or could be done in a 3D, one of our rendering partners 3D software, people like Keyshot and V-Ray and Vred, and there's so many of them that I can't name them all, but yeah, that's the idea, is that these files can then be used in those different softwares. So what I did here is on the top are different variations with our textured plastic, and then on the bottom are those same variations, but with a smooth plastic, much more reflective, as you can see. So that gave me the ability to say, okay, I like this, I don't like this, maybe start to cross off a few. And in the end, I decided, you know what, I really liked it starting with the blue on the bottom, ending with the red on the top, with a white stand for it. So the next question is, do I prefer this textured version or the smooth version? Now, there could be a lot of reasons why one would pick one or the other. Aesthetic, maybe the textured is better for babies to hold on to, more grip. But yeah, a lot of decisions would be made based on, or would inform this decision, and that could be then spoken about. But you're already moving faster than having to do physical prototypes and things like that, and make decisions about the variation of these different colors and position and things like that. So lastly, I did one rendering that's more of a beauty rendering versus these, which are just concept, that where you can actually see what this toy would look like if we had it produced today. And instead of going with just one of these smooth versus textured, I actually did a hybrid. So we've got a smooth one with a little bit of texture, a textured version, another smooth, textured, and smooth with the textured stand for it. was how I decided to go in the end. So the deliverables that I would probably send on now to do more of the specification part would be concept images. So something like this, maybe even a couple of these other ones. The CXF files, so those are the files that I made measuring the Pantone chip, so which holds color information about each color, the Pantone color. So early on when we figured out what the Pantone colors were for my palette, and then also the AXF files. So the AXF files we used were used to create the actual appearance files. So those are not only color, but they're color and texture and reflectivity and glossiness and opacity and things like that that are important in visualizing those materials accurately. So I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to talking to you more next about specification.
Great. Thanks, Thomas. So this wraps up today's webinar. Again, if you have any questions, we'll leave about 30 more seconds here right now for you to go ahead and submit those. We will follow up with your questions after this webinar. Again, a recording of this webinar will also be sent out so that you can review it whenever it is convenient for you. Finally, I am going to display a polling question, which you will see on your screens shortly. Feel free to answer it if you are interested in speaking to a sales rep or a customer service rep or even Thomas to learn more information. If you answer that, we'll get you in touch with the correct person. So I'd like to say thanks again, and please join us next time when we talk about color specification.